the regime is the weakest it's ever been. You see, both from an internal perspective, there has been a drought. As you said, the currency has been severely devalued, subsidies have been scrapped. And so the regime from the inside and externally, following the Iran-Israel war, the regime is increasingly weak.
Demonstrations in Iran, prompted by the plummeting currency and dire economic conditions, have spread to several other cities. The protests began in Tehran on Sunday. Iran's Prosecutor General said any attempt to create instability would be met with a decisive response. Dr Efrat Sopher is the chair of the Ezri Centre for Iran and Gulf States Research, and she joins me now. Welcome to the show, Dr Sopher.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's great to have you on because we've seen protests in Iran before, and every time they happen, people think this could potentially be the end game for the regime. Are these protests any more different, any more serious than the ones we've seen in the recent past?
Well, what we see is a continuation, as you say, of a series of protests. But what is unique in this series, in this round, is that the regime is the weakest it's ever been. You see, both from an internal perspective, there has been a drought. As you said, the currency has been severely devalued, subsidies have been scrapped. And so the regime from the inside and externally, following the Iran-Israel war, the regime is increasingly weak. And so what we see are internal elements that are properly threatening the regime now.
And I mean, I read an article in the paper quite recently saying that Iran, sort of day-to-day life in Iran had become much more sort of open, women potentially not wearing their hijab, more kind of open playing of music. I mean, has the climate changed a bit because the regime knows it can't push back as hard as it used to be able to in the past?
Well, the regime is all about regime survival. And that goes from the supreme leader to Pezeshkian, to the president, who's seen as more as a reformer, so to speak. And as you said, yes, I've also been following Iranians and influencers inside Iran who walk around as anyone would in any Western city. But this is part of an Iranian regime stopgap to maintain, to keep the people at bay. And where we see in the more prominent neighborhoods of Tehran, for example, women do walk around without the hijab, but we see enforcement in the poorer areas of Tehran are much, much, much harsher. We've also seen 1,500 people who have been executed since the Israel-Iran war, since June. So they're at record levels, execution levels, without proper judicial process. And so the regime is doing anything it can to survive.
And do you think, how does this play out, Dr. Sopher? Do you see a crackdown happening imminently, or will we potentially be talking about these protests in January?
I think that as soon as the regime really does feel that it is under threat, which I think we are a whisker away from it feeling that threatened, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, will do anything in its power to stay. We know that there have been unconfirmed reports of very heavy enforcement overnight of the IRGC using lethal force against protesters. I see that as increasingly happening. They've got very, very good surveillance systems, Chinese surveillance systems that are very good at knowing where all the protests are, who the dissidents are, and they're in danger. And I think we will be seeing a crescendo here. And what is key to watch for us is what the army does. So there is a competition between the IRGC and the army. We've seen some members of the army flying Pahlavi flags. We will need to be seeing more of that for a proper threat to the regime. We will also be seeing, we're starting seeing the beginning now of the bazaar class, the merchant class, joining forces with university students. That's what brought down the Pahlavi regime in '79, and that's what will be the Achilles heel. What we should also be seeing and looking at is what the regime will be doing externally as it becomes increasingly desperate. So we need to watch IRGC activity around the world, targeting dissidents, targeting Jewish communities. They will be targeting soft targets to distract from what's going on inside, from the droughts, from the protests, from the proper threat that the regime has, and it's distracting from the outside. And also, I believe they will not want to be threatened with a military action against them, because they will not be able to handle both an internal and external threat. So we need to be watching them closely, Ed, to see how this will escalate.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. That's Dr. Efrat Sopher, the chair of the Ezri Centre for Iran and Gulf States Research, coming on to talk about the protests, the increasingly serious protests taking place in Iran.
Eyewitness video released on Tuesday shows crowds marching along a Tehran street over the soaring cost of living. Iran's currency has lost nearly half its value against the dollar in 2025, with inflation reaching above 42% in December. Reuters confirmed the video's location, but could not independently verify the date it was recorded. Iranian state media said the protests, which included shopkeepers and merchants in Tehran's Grand Bazaar, took place on Sunday and Monday. The semi-official Fars news agency reported on Tuesday that the protests had spread to several universities. Unrest has repeatedly flared in Iran in recent years. Previous protests drew violent crackdowns and widespread arrests. On Tuesday, a government spokesperson said a dialogue mechanism would be set up and includes talks with protest leaders.
The government will listen patiently, even if there are harsh voices, because we believe that our people are patient enough, and when their voices are raised, the pressure that is being put on them is high. The government's job is to hear the voices and help them reach a common understanding to solve the problems that exist in society.
Iran's economy has been in deep trouble since U.S. sanctions were reimposed in 2018. Economic disparities between citizens and the elite, along with mismanagement and corruption, have fanned discontent. On Monday, the central bank chief resigned, and U.S. President Donald Trump said he may back another round of Israeli airstrikes if Tehran resumed work on ballistic missiles or any nuclear weapons program. Iran says its nuclear energy program is entirely peaceful and that it has not tried to build a nuclear bomb.